Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's landscape live seminar. My name is Yue, and together with Luca and Elena today, we'll be moderating the session. Our session will typically run for about 1 hour with 30 to 45 minutes presentation, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. We'll open the chat for questions as we are close to the end. Please note that our seminar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. So now I'm very delighted to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Lucy Clarke. Lucy is a fluvial geomorphologist specializing in understanding river process and flood mitigation. In particular, she wants to know how nature-based solutions and natural flood management can be used to moderate the impacts of climate change. Lucy finished her PhD at the University of Exeter and is now a senior lecturer at Nottingham Trent University. Today, we'll hear from Lucy on a very interesting topic. So it's titled Reflections on Success in Academia. Please join me in welcoming Lucy. Yeah, okay, Lucy, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. This is some work, as you can hear, it's not my main research. I work on fluvial geomorphology, but this is something that I'm very passionate about and that I've been doing over a series of papers for a couple of years now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to present the work from three different publications that I've done with the co-authors listed on the screen over the past couple of years. So the first paper, and you'll see I've got a QR code in the top corner. So if you're interested in finding out more about these, you can scan it. It's also on my last slide as well. They're all open access. So the first paper we did was thinking about early career academic experiences. And this came from the fact that the four of us were all early career academics, and we'd all had very different journeys through, but all of us had involved fixed term contracts. We wanted to find out more about what it was like getting into academia. And so we did quite a long online survey, and we asked anyone within 10 years of completing their PhD within geosciences. We kind of gave a bit more explanation of what we wanted, and then we advertised it via social media. So we got 48 responses to this, and they were primarily UK focused, which I think is because all four of us were UK based. So that was our kind of network. So if we were to do it again, we'd definitely look into how we could broaden it out. In terms of the rest of the world, it was really from the US to New Zealand, like with countries in between. So we got a really good range of countries. So we based a lot of our work on the UK context. And use the rest of the world as a kind of conceptual contextualization, checking where it worked in the paper. In terms of the gender split, you can see here we asked people to self-identify whether they were men, women, or the one at the bottom, other, and they could either classify or just state that. We had about 2/3 of the respondents were women. So we did have to take that into account when we were doing the analysis as well. And then we asked people to think about the time of to state how long it's been since they graduated from their PhD. So we could put that into all of the analysis that we did. And you can see that the majority of respondents were 5 to 6 years post-PhD, but we did get good representation from all of the different timelines. And it's worth noting as well that this wasn't just sent out to people that are still in academia. 20% of our respondents had actually left academia and filled this in, kind of thinking back on their academic career. So the first question that we asked was, did you still consider yourself an ECA? We just said anyone within 10 years of their graduating from their PhD can fill it in. Do you think you're still an ECA? And the majority of people said yes. We got 22% that didn't classify themselves as ECAs. So looking into this, all of the people that felt they were no longer ECAs had completed their PhD more than 5 years ago, but some it was 5 years. But 50% of those people had since left academia. And one of the things they commented on was actually outside of academia, you're trying to look professional and skilled and specialist, so it wasn't in their interest to be an early career academic. Instead they wanted to be still seen as a skilled person that, they could charge more for their services and things. In terms of those that said yes, this is the breakdown. So 100% of people 4 years or less define themselves as an ECA. But 5 to 6 years, over 80% were still identifying, and 7 to 10 years, over 40% still were. And this is really interesting to consider, given that most of our grants cap ECAs at 5 years. So it's worth considering. Everyone's got a different journey. So thinking about what actually constitutes an ECA. In terms of women, all women that completed the survey, who were 5 to 6 years post PhD, still considers themselves an ECA. Whereas after 7 years, there was a 50-50 gender split. So one of the things we're really interested in was thinking about the contractual status. So thinking about fixed term contracts. So we asked a series of questions about what are the number of contracts that you'd had, so separate contracts that you'd had. What's the total number of years that you've spent on fixed term contracts since you finished your PhD? How many institutions have you been at through those? Because we found some people might have a lot of contracts, but they may have never left their university. So they've still got that kind of precarity. And also we asked another question, which isn't shown on the screen, which was about moving. Had you moved institutions, but not your town? Had you moved towns? Had you moved countries? To get a feel for kind of relocation as well. So on the screen, we've got on the left, all of our responses. And on the right, we also separated out those that were 5 years or more post PhD, just to see what the comparison was. And we pulled out men in darker colours and women to have a look at that. So we found that fixed term contracts varied in duration from 7 months to 5 years. And on average, people spent about 5 years after their PhD on fixed term contracts. But it should be noted that 48% of the respondents were still on fixed term contracts. So, that number could go up. In terms of relocation, 56% of people had to relocate. 37% of these were to a different town or city, 19% to a different country. And most people said that the move to a different country tended to be a choice, whereas town or city relocation tended to be because there was no choice but jobs. And in general, we find that women typically held fewer fixed term contracts and for a much shorter period of time in total again. And those that left did cite this as one of the reasons that they left academia. One of the other key things we asked about were key life experiences. So we want to know how people felt academia as a career impacted on some of the big decisions, the big things that you have to do through your life. And we wanted people to say whether they felt a career in academia made these things much easier. So that's the kind of yellows and the light greens, or harder, so the darker colours. And we found that actually people perceived that an academic career as an ECA was very detrimental to a lot of these key life experiences. So things like building a stable pension, buying a house, living where you wanted to live, providing caring duties, providing security for the future and starting a family were all made harder if you were having an academic career. But there were some things, so earning an adequate salary came out as easier, and randomly meeting a partner, especially if you're a man in academia, that seemed to come out as a perceived benefit of it. But overall, we found that people did find that these things were harder, and it was harder for women. So for all of the kind of factors that we've seen, it was noted more by women than it was by men. And some of them, so things like starting a family, providing caring duties, live where you want to, and building a stable pension were really seen as much harder by women than they were by men. But there were benefits. So I don't want to be all negative. So we asked people to say what they felt the benefits of an academic career were. And you can see some of the kind of keywords that came out of the open text from this. So they loved the research, the travel, the flexibility, teaching, opportunities and skills development. And if we look at these in more detail, you can see that the things that came out most strongly were freedom and independence in terms of being allowed to do whatever you wanted to do. You know, there was a lot more freedom in terms of your day-to-day life, flexibility, and this is in terms of your role, your schedule, the hours. So you can kind of choose your working day, much more than a lot of other careers. But then other things that came out strongly were collegiality, so networks and the people that you work with, professional development, and just that ability to keep learning. The research people were doing, the pay and benefits, people felt it was a really stimulating career to have. Teaching, travel, and diversity in terms of the role and responsibilities that you've got all came out as real benefits of an academic career. So there were many other things in that first paper, but one of the things we started to look at from that was thinking about this idea of academic success and what is academic success. So the second paper that we looked at was evaluating this idea of academic success. And it was another online survey, and it was anyone that self-identified as a geomorphologist, an environmental or earth scientist, any geoscientist really. And it was any country, any career stage, and it was a really short questionnaire that basically said, how do you define academic success? So it was in no more than 3 sentences. Can you tell us what you think a successful academic looks like? What are the qualities that we're looking for? And again, we advertised this on social media and we got 92 responses to this. And for this, you can see that the majority of people come from the UK, Europe, and North America. So we do acknowledge that we've captured perspectives purely from a Western and Northern Hemisphere in this. But I think it was a relatively straightforward thing to do, and I would encourage people to replicate this in their own countries, in their own languages, to try and get kind of an idea of whether this holds true or not. In terms of gender, we actually got quite an equal gender division between men and women that responded to this. And then we got a smaller proportion who self-identified as other. So we had a look at this and we got people to give some of their demographics and then looked at their reasons, and we did thematic analysis to try and group together the main things, the main qualities that people thought of as being successful in academia. And the first interesting thing we found was that there's very little difference in gender, which we were really surprised at, given we just published a paper that looked at kind of key life experiences and how different it was between men and women. So we had assumed that there'd be huge variations in terms of what success is, but it turns out there's not. Men, women, non-binary and other all kind of see very similar traits in terms of what we classify as academic success. But where we did see differences is when we started to look at the years that people have been in academia. So as from left to right, you've been in an academic career for longer, and we defined an academic career as years post PhD. And you can see that there are some similarities. So the bottom two, the yellow and the green, networking and mentoring and funded research and impact, all have a very strong kind of value in terms of academic success for all career stages. But if we look at it, we can see that the lightest blue is scientific output and communication. And this is really important, or seen as really important at the early stages of your career. It's publish or perish. Everyone that's an early career researcher has been encouraged to publish as much as possible. It's a reality. But actually, if you look at it as a measure of success, it reduces in its significance as you go through your academic career. Less surprisingly is probably the dark blue, which is obtaining a permanent job. It's important at the start of your career, peaking 2 to 5 years. That's when people really want to stop being on full-time fixed-term contracts and get a permanent job. And then it disappears as people become more established and they get those permanent roles. If we look at trends that go in the opposite direction, we see that up at the top, the red, teaching and feedback, and then the kind of mid-blue, personal development and work-life balance, they grow in importance in terms of what makes you successful as you go through your career. So, people are looking at other people, and if you have a good work-life balance, they see you as being successful if you're still got your funded research and your networking and your mentoring. And one of the factors that came in around kind of mid-career is this kind of maroony purple color, which is peer esteem. And this becomes significant and it keeps being significant. And the main reason for that is that around this time, any progression that you have is generally based around external references. So what your colleagues think of you becomes really important because that's how you're assessed as part of your career. So as part of this, we asked a secondary question of those people that had been employed 5 years or more in academia. And we said, has your definition of success changed through your career? So what you've just put down as a successful academic and all the values that you think, is that what you thought at the start of your career, or has it changed? And it was pretty equal in terms of the response we got from this. So 54% of people said yes, they thought that their definition of success has changed as they'd gone through their career. 46% thought it hadn't. And if we break it down and have a look at this in more detail, in terms of time in academia, again, pretty equal between those that thought it had changed and those that hadn't. But interestingly, if we look at it by gender, then what we see is that it's quite equal for men in terms of those that do and don't think their definitions changed. But for women, 2/3 of the women felt that their definition of success had changed over time. And for those that classified as other, it was the opposite. 80% felt that theirs hadn't changed at all. Although it has to be noted that there were a smaller proportion of other, so we have to treat any kind of statistics associated that with caution. So we also, in addition to sort of asking if their definition of success had changed, for those that specified yes, we asked them to just provide a sentence that explained why. Why did they think it had changed? What were the main things that they thought had changed? Oops. And these were the main reasons. So people felt that they were now less focused on metrics. So as they become more established in their career, they had less of a focus on metrics and kind of publications. And instead, it was about the impact of the research that they were having. And rather than just focusing on publications and papers, which is what you have to do early on in your career, they actually put more emphasis on outreach, other forms of engagement and disseminating that research to a wider audience. They also felt that collegiality was really important. So it's not just about being a successful academic, it's about being a good person and, all the other things you bring to your role. And one thing that came out really strongly was being a good mentor. And looking at people at that career stage, they wanted to see evidence that people were good mentors. Peer esteem, as I've already said, that came out because it's kind of a reality that you need that. But work-life balance, people reevaluated through time and felt that actually it was about being successful in your own life as well as in your professional life and being able to balance those two aspects, which is really challenging at times in an academic career. So those that do it well, they felt that was one of the values of success. So one of the things that we did in this paper was we wanted to know whether perceptions related to expectations for early career academics, because a lot of these things that came out, people valued them later on in their career, but in job applications, that isn't represented. So we did a piece of work where we had a look, and this was small scale because it's very difficult to do this with GDPR, but we used our own experience of job applications and we went through as many job adverts as we possibly could find. And in them, we had a look at a whole range of things. So we looked at things like salary and how much salary had changed over time. But we also looked at what people were being asked for in early career positions. So these ones are for teaching and research, teaching, and also postdocs. We kind of combine them all in. And the graph shows the number of criteria you're asked to meet. So essential or desirable criteria. And the big circle in the middle is your average, and then you've got your minimum and maximum. So what we can see is you are being asked for more in early career job applications than I was when I started applying around 2010. So, on average now, there are 20 criteria that you're being asked to fulfill as part of those applications. And if we have a look, so this is just taking the earliest applications we had from 2010 and the latest ones, this was up until 2021. It looked at things that came up, so criteria that commonly came up. And it was only those that scored across the whole range of applications and adverts that we focused on. And what you can see is there were 4 in 2010 that came up: PhD, publications, communications, teaching. They were the 4 things that you had to have to get a job in 2010. Whereas in 2019 to 21, you can see that the list has increased. And those in yellow are the differences. So you can see communications dropped off, but I think rather than dropping off, I think it's just being more nuanced now, and you're getting more kind of focus on the types of communication people want you to have, rather than it just being overall communication. But coming in, we've got grants now that you didn't have before. Focus really on the type of research and having your own research agenda. Specialist skills, high quality, problem solving, not just teaching now, but pedagogy as well. So understanding that kind of learning behind the teaching. So I think it's just really interesting. And I think it's one of the things in academia we do have to reflect on is what are we asking people and how much are we gatekeeping jobs? There is huge demand for jobs. So we need to make sure we get the right person, but are we asking too much of them during kind of job applications? And how does that align to this kind of evaluation of our definition of success? So finally, my final paper, which just came out a month or so ago, and this was looking at academic success amidst the climate and environmental crisis. So this is thinking about one of the biggest challenges we have at the moment, all of us, it's thinking about the climate and environmental crisis and what can we do about this? And how does academic success and everything that we know about it fit into this? So this was a very different experience for me and for the other 4 co-authors as well. We're all geoscientists, so we're all physical scientists, and we did a dialogue. So we did a conversation where we set 3 questions and we provided them in advance, and people thought about their answers, and then we had a conversation about it. And from that, we developed a publication and recommendations and reflections from that. So the 3 questions that we asked ourselves were, how do we define academic success in the context of the climate and environmental crisis? We know that academic jobs, the workload is increasing. There's lots of research about there. So we've got more demands on our time. So do we actually feel we've got the capacity to be able to address this? So can we not only address the climate and environmental crisis, but also think about the measures of success that are associated with that as well? And do we think that these measures of success are actually valued both by our colleagues and by our institutions? So are we getting recognition for the work that we do around this massive global issue that we're looking at? And there's a lot of text on here. I'm not asking you to look at it all. But we came up with 6 key reflections from this conversation. So first of all, we need to recognise that we can adjust and adapt how we portray academic success. So there isn't just one route that we can follow in terms of being a successful academic. So we need to be more transparent about that and more encouraging of people to follow different pathways. But as these definitions of success are becoming broader, we need more transparency about evaluation of them. So what you tend to find is that if you go for a job in an external organisation, you get that list of criteria that I've just talked about. If you're internally getting promoted, it's a black box. We have no idea what we're actually being assessed on. We have things that we have to evidence, but we don't get feedback to say whether research is 80% of my evaluation and teaching is 20. Do they account for all the other things that I do? We just don't know. So we need more transparency to understand how that's assessed. We have lots of different pressures on us. So how we integrate the climate and environmental crisis into that is absolutely up to us. It's a personal choice. And lots of people don't have the capacity to do everything they want to. So, that's going to create different priorities for different people. And we shouldn't judge them on that. And we should still value their success based on that. But we do need to place more value on the work around tackling this. So just a summary of kind of the main things that we reflected on, but the one that I really want to focus on is the one that's highlighted. So giving greater consideration to where wider engagement associated with climate and environmental crisis sits within the traditional breakdown of academic responsibilities. So what do I mean by that? So this is how the kind of core academic work is divided up. So most people, myself included, have teaching, we have research, and we have some kind of administration or academic citizenship. And this varies for every person. So if you're on a postdoctoral research contract, then your research bucket is going to be very big. And this is on a pendulum, so it means that you will have a lot of focus on that element of it. So here you're thinking you're going to be weighted in different directions. If you're on a teaching focus contract, then that's going to be a bigger bucket. But what we're interested here is, what do we put in those buckets related to the climate and environmental crisis? So for research, you might be researching about climate change impact or adaptation. So that's going to fill up your bucket and you're going to have a weighting towards that. If you're doing teaching, do you teach about climate change impact? Are you empowering students to engage in relevant climate and environmental initiatives? So that could be something that could go into your teaching bucket and weigh it out. In terms of administration and academic citizenship, it could be things that you're doing internally within your institution. So maybe you're working towards net zero policies. At my institution, I'm the Nature Positive Chair. So that is something that's in my bucket, trying to kind of raise the profile of climate change in my institution internally. Or I can be looking outside of academia and thinking about public lectures, public engagement, talking to the media, trying to educate people more widely about it. And the point is that everyone has different buckets and they have different impacts. So there are different strengths and different priorities that everyone has in these areas related to the climate and environmental crisis. And it all comes down to your personal satisfaction. So what is it you're interested in? What do you want to do? And also your own personal career progression and how does this tie into it? But I think it's about thinking for everyone, how does your job divide up? And where does the climate and environmental crisis fit into these? You know, which one is the kind of fullest bucket, but also which other ones would you like to do, but you don't have time to do? So, you know, all of that needs to be considered as part of your academic career and making sure that you get that recognition for it so that, you know, we are actually acknowledging when people are working towards these things. So, my take home points from this, from all three papers. So, first of all, we need to support early career academics. So, we know that there are fixed term contracts that are quite prevalent. We know there's a lot of precarity around it. So, from the paper, two of the big things that came out of this that are very difficult to deal with when you're on a fixed term contract is parental leave and flexible working. So, that's the kind of thing that when you're on a permanent job, depending on what country you're in, it's just formalized. But it's much more difficult to do when you're on a fixed term contract and you've got a fixed deadline for a project. Taking out time from that is very difficult and it can have a direct impact on people's career progression and the outputs that they get. The other thing was financial impact. So when you are moving and relocating, there is a cost associated with that. So we need to acknowledge those relocation costs. And it means that people don't have, quite often, a monetary buffer. So a lot of people commented on the time it takes for expenses to be paid for conferences, for field work. It can be really expensive if they're not able to claim in advance. So I think it's something that we can all do if we've got ECAs is think about that and acknowledge that actually, you know, people shouldn't be out of pocket. So what can we do to make sure that they're not and we're not putting that additional pressure on them? Need to think about reducing the number of fixed term contracts if we can. So if someone's been employed at the same university and they're just rolling on kind of 3 to 6 month contracts, that makes it really stressful and can create a lot of anxiety. But it also means you can't do things like buy a house. So we've got to think about what can we do about that and establish a fair minimum contract length. And also build in how do you actually get a permanent position? It's really difficult. When I was I had a number of different contracts and I moved, I think, to 6 different cities while I was doing my postdocs and short-term kind of teaching contracts. And all my effort was fixed on the next job for when my contract ended. So I didn't get a lot of time to sit down and think, but actually, what's my priority that I need to focus on to get a permanent job? You know, what are the things in my CV on my list of skills that I need to focus on so I can stop doing the fixed term because they're fantastic and they're great experience, but you come to a point where you just want it to end. So giving that kind of career advice about how you can transition into a permanent position. Looking at our second paper, you can see that what is successful changes as you progress through your career. So we really need to be aware of this when giving guidance in terms of expectations and what it means to be successful. So there are realities there about what is in a job application that you've got to meet the criteria for. But I think we can all think about the guidance and advice we give to other people. And Related to that is that we have a huge number of pathways that we can now follow in academia. All of them are valid and all of them have their own value and own successes associated with them. So people can tailor the career that they want to. And what we need to do is support them in showing that it's still successful, whether you choose to go down a research or a teaching or an outreach and engagement pathway. It's all about what works best for you and what your interests are. So we need to make sure that we're clear on the definitions of success that include all of those so that we're encompassing the kind of multitude of different avenues we've got in academia. And then finally, the climate and environmental crisis is going to be in your career because it's so fundamental to what we're all doing in some ways, but it's going to be in different ways, whether it's focused primarily on your teaching, your research, or that kind of administration and academic citizenship. That's for you to decide and think about how best it works for you. But just make sure that you're aware of what you're doing for each of those different elements and make sure it's valued by your institution, by your colleagues, and it's in the measures of success that you set for yourself so that you're acknowledging the work that you're doing kind of more widely than just the impact of it. So hopefully that was interesting and thought-provoking for people. These are all of the papers. So if you're interested in reading more about any of them, you can access them all through the DOIs or the QR links. But yeah, that's everything.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, let's see whether we have any questions from the audience. Yeah, I think everyone is trying to type. Mm, yeah.
I would have one to give some time for folks to write. Lucy, did you also interview people who were scientists but had left the field of academia, continuing to do scientific research outside of academia? And what is their perspective on the values of success?
Yeah, really good question. So we didn't interview anyone, but in the online survey, we did have people that were in kind of research institutions. So they weren't in universities, but they still undertook research. And the metrics of success more closely aligned with early career academics. So you tended to find a greater contribution, greater proportion coming from publications, research impact, rather than that kind of tail we saw in academia where you start to see other things starting to come in.
All right. So almost a freeze frame of the time when they had exited.
Yes, yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I also have one question, maybe like a comment, because I have done two postdocs, but I have never been taught how to write a grant proposal. And suddenly I mean, in the near future, I'm going to need to write a proposal or maybe to get a grant that's highly evaluated I think in the job evaluation. So I feel this is a big transition from a postdoc from a permanent job, and many people didn't realize that. So I think maybe people can make a call whenever you are supervising a postdoc. It's better to engage them into the proposal writing and teach them how to write, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think there's many things that we can do to bring people in to give them experiences. In the dialogue, one of the things that we talked about, we had an early career academic involved in that paper and said that they were very fortunate in that their supervisory team had really provided opportunities for them to do wider engagement. And they loved that and they could see them doing that as part of their future work. But it's not an opportunity that any of the other postdocs in their department had got. It was just quite focused on their project, their supervisor. So I think it's really important that we look at the wider skills outside of the project. And it's really difficult because you've got quite a short amount of time to do quite a lot of work. So, it can be quite challenging to fit everything into it. But yeah, and I think grant writing is so important. one of the things that I found with looking through all of those job adverts was the growth of grants. And you could see it through time. And I also did a small amount of work looking at the change in success rates for grants. And I found that in the UK, we have the kind of UK government grants, RCUK, and in the 1990s, there was a 98% success rate, but that was never in the job application. I know, I wish that I was older. Now it's around 4%, but it's a requirement of your job to have it. And I think one of the things we also need to do is think about what other things we can say. So you might not have the success, but you should still shout about the fact that you put an application in. So you should say, I was the research lead at my last institution, and I got everybody to put in at the end of your year objectives. I applied for £1.2 million worth of research funding. I only got 200,000, but I applied for this, and even put in the kind of success rates around it just to show and acknowledge that, you're trying. But yeah, I think writing people in and giving people that experience is definitely worth it.
We have
Yes,
a question
definitely.
in the chat from Kristen Cook. She writes, "Hi Lucy, thanks a lot for this. I was wondering how much the time penalty of non-permanent jobs came up. Like applying for and interviewing for jobs can take a ton of time. Moving and starting over in a new place takes a lot of time to get going, etc. Aside from the uncertainty of short-term contracts, my experience is that this extra time you lose from them can be quite detrimental for early career scientists."
Yeah, I would agree. And it did come up. And one of the things was that quite often it was seen as either publish, so you had a strong CV, or spend your time on applications to get your next job, you know, and take the risk that you might have a period of time where you're unemployed. It was a choice that people had to make. And I think it very much depends on your supervisory team, how much you're supported through that process, because it can be, for me, it was 6 months before a contract was coming to an end. You start to really focus on what's coming next, so you're really starting to look to the next one. So you're losing the time. So I think it is really detrimental, and it's something we need to talk about more. But it's also something that as supervisors, we need to start thinking about what does that mean for our projects and how can we support that? I know in some institutions, you can have kind of a 4-month period where you're employed after your PhD to write up publications, something where there's a kind of bridging time, where, you've got funding for a project, but could the institution allow extra time to allow publications, which would give you a bit more time to be able to start looking for jobs. But it takes a huge amount of work to do the application process, especially when you've got sometimes up to 30 criteria that you have to show that you've met to be able to get those. And then the interviews are becoming quite long in terms of what's asked of you as well. So you're asked to do multiple different things rather than just a kind of hour interview like it used to be. So yeah, it's a really good point, Kirsten.
One slide that struck me, I think it was in the second paper, was this transition from, I think it was a 2 to 5 years and 5 to 10 years post PhD. And there was this really sharp drop off in the importance of a permanent position. It was almost replaced, I believe, by a peer esteem, I think was the term. And maybe you could go back on that slide so that everyone has it. I think I remember it correctly, but I could be off.
No, you were right.
And so, exactly. So in the years working in academia, yeah, 2 to 5, 5 to 10. The question I have, and I suppose that many of people who are listening to it live right now or on YouTube, it's a bit of a a series of mirrors, right? We all see ourselves partly in these types of evolution. And I'm in that 5 to 10 gap right now. And one thing that's interesting is, in this case, do you think that the drop off amongst your participants in the obtaining a permanent job is that they obtained a permanent job, or the people who remained now have a permanent job,
Yeah.
but they don't define it as a success anymore, and they've just moved the goalpost to define success as something that they don't yet have or they aspire to? Or is it maybe more of a realization that, well, in the end, a permanent position is really good to have, but in terms of my academic success or my intellectual success, I know enough people who are not permanent and who I esteem very much. Is that simply the fact that people have moved into permanent positions, or more than they realize, oh, actually, this is not a very good metric for success?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think people do realize that it's not a metric of success, because I do think luck has a huge part to play in an academic career. Like, everyone in academia has worked incredibly hard to get to where they are. But ultimately, there has to have been the right job come up at the right time, for you to be able to apply and just beat other people with those little bits that, make you the top candidate. So I do think that there has to be that element of, opportunity, I suppose, more than luck, that, your jobs came up at the right time for you to be able to take advantage of them. So I think there is that element of, how can we define success on something that is out of our hands? But at the same time, I do think it is that quite a lot of those people that are still in academia, it's that critical point where people were thinking, I either get a permanent job and stay, or I move out of academia, and do something else. And those that get a permanent job, what tends to happen is, all of a sudden, you've got a lot of other things that you've got to deal with. And that's where I think the peer esteem comes in, is, it's supporting all those other things that allow you to maintain that job and keep progressing in it. So suddenly you realize that rather than doing all your time in applications, actually you're doing a lot of other jobs, and a lot of those revolve around the networks that you've built up, because peer esteem is not just about kind of progression, it's also about, you need to have interdisciplinary teams from other organisations to be able to get grant applications. You want to have interesting publications with a mixed team, and so people have to respect you and the work you do to be named on those bids. So I think it is a bit of a transition in thinking, but also a change in circumstances. So people are thinking differently about their metrics of success.
Thank you.
Yeah, so maybe since we are waiting for the other questions, I have been seeing this big debate on some social media about whether people have to consider leaving the academia early on, because I feel the longer you do a postdoc, the further you are away from an industry job. I think many of us have a moment that, oh, I want to leave this academia. But then if I look at the hiring requirements from the industry, I didn't have anything they required. So that's really painful. I think our whole community needs some kind of education. Not everyone will end up with, academia. So some of them, I mean, some of us should be prepared and be taught, be educated to, for this situation. So I think your numbers, many of them are for those ones who survive, but there are many people who cannot. So I don't know how you think of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really true. And I think it's one of the things, it is very much a pyramid when you think about academia, where, the number of professors is very small, the number of PhD students is very large. So it can't be that everybody is going to make it to professor. It's just not possible. So I think we do, through PhD and through these fixed term contracts, have really honest conversations about what people want, because a lot of people are channeled into an academic career that don't necessarily want one as well, but just showing people what their options are. And I would say that actually you can get out at any point. Your skills are always relevant. I've had a few of my friends that I've talked to about leaving academia because they left after doing a couple of postdocs. And they said their skills, it's the things that you don't think about. It's the fact that you can problem solve, that you can investigate things and you can write clearly, you can communicate in a number of different formats. Grant writing, really big if you're going into consultancy because you've got to win your tenures. So, all of those things can help you. So, if you're doing a postdoc, it could be thinking about just how do you reframe the skills that you've got rather than for an academic audience, for another one. And the other is thinking about how we present it, because in academia we are quite unique in that a lot of jobs we have these like massive CVs and these lengthy cover letters, like it's a really long application that we have to go through. Whereas if you're going out of it, people like a kind of no more than 2-page CV. They like things to be really clearly bullet pointed. So it's about kind of selling yourself for a different audience. But certainly in the UK, there's a national shortage of geomorphologists. And that's something we need to be telling people more, is that they are desperate for people with environmental skills in consultancy. So, thinking about there are alternatives if people want them and just showing them how it can help. I think the problem is most of the supervisory team tend to be people like me that have been in institutions for so long that all we know is universities. So we need to kind of rely on other people to be able to give us that advice about what happens when you leave.
Yes, great answers. Let's see. Okay.
Maybe I still have one question.
Okay, yeah, go
Um,
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so while you were talking, I thought, I will ask you, like, what are the solutions? But then in your last slide, you actually came up with these take-home messages of like how things should change. And then my question is like, how confident are you that things will change? And or are you seeing already, for example, I don't know, in your department, like where you conducted the study, so they even have in-house someone that did this, that showed how important these things are. Do you think their thing will move, or do you see other department where things are moving? Or yeah, what do you think?
It's a really good point. And for all three papers, we made sure we had recommendations at the end, and quite clear recommendations for people that read it. So it wasn't just this is a problem, it's trying to not necessarily give solutions, but just suggestions or considerations that people could put in. I would say, speaking from my personal experience, over my years in academia, I've seen a huge amount change. So there's definitely potential. Things are very different over the last 5 years, I would say, and there is more acknowledgement. There are still major issues around fixed term contracts, parental leave, that are big problems because they're tied into the funding and they're tied into the institutions. So it's not something necessarily that individual supervisors can do. But yeah, in terms of my own experience, I have fed this back and we've had some changes in terms of things like I talked about the expenses, making sure that we had, advances for all PhD students at my last institution, and that got implemented, because it shouldn't be that people are, so it's a small thing, but it's a big thing for your person involved. And people just didn't realize, when I was talking about relocation costs, people don't think about it as much because quite often with a permanent job, you might get something to help you relocate. If you're renting, your deposit's tied up in one place and you've got to pay it in a second place before you get it back. So I think just have sharing that had a big impact on people because they just hadn't thought about it. So I think lots of small things are being done, and I think a lot of people, or what I'm hoping from this, is that people just reflect on their own personal experience. And if everyone can do that and think about little things that they can do to help, it will lead to a systematic change eventually.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see whether we have any other question from the audience. All right, folks, as we are close to the hour, I think we have a very fantastic communication, and thank you for the excellent talk from Lucy. If everyone agrees, we are going to finish the session today. And yeah, so for next week, we will have a talk from Dr. Dan Parsons from UK. So the title is to be announced. So hope to see you all there. Yeah. Stop
Thank you,
recording.
Lucy.
Thanks.
No, thank you very much for inviting me.